Pulse News Lanka. Today we have some very important migration news. In May 2014, there was a stop to certain parent and family visas, but once again, these can be lodged. Dinesh Wirikoti from D Legal Barristers and Solicitors is here to tell us a bit more about what has happened recently to allow this change. Dinesh, what has happened in recent times?
Emily, in the recent past, a few months ago, the federal government through an Parliament Act stopped these quite a number of visas. But yesterday, a disallowance motion was passed through the Parliament, and again we are in a situation we are able to apply for these number of visas.
So what kind of visas can be lodged and when?
Yes, good question. Parent visas and mostly relative-sponsored visas, aged parent, carers visas. Approximately about 8 visas now we can apply.
Is there a time period in which these visas can be applied?
Well, from yesterday, since the time, I think it's by midday yesterday, that's the 25th of September, as soon as the disallowance motion was allowed, from that time onwards we think we got at least a 6 months window period to submit applications.
So what do you mean by that 6-month window?
Windows, you just open and close windows. No, I'm just kidding. Normally the government can bring in new legislation saying we are going to do the same as we did again, ceasing the visas. But because the current disallowance motion was passed in relation to the regulation that ceased previous visas, normally it's not the practice and it's not allowed to bring in the same ceasing regulations or laws within that 6 months period of time of the disallowance motion. So hopefully after 6 months period we may be still allowed to apply for these visas, but that's why we say we at least got 6 months.
Okay. You mentioned before the various subclasses. What are the major differences?
Subclass is the exact visa type that we are required to apply. So under various subclasses, there are requirements for a visa applicant to meet. So it's quite important to identify your subclass and check the requirements for that under that subclass to make your visa application not only a valid application but also to assess whether you meet the rest of the criteria.
And what about lodging the application? Where do you do that from?
Yes. Now your parent may be here or may be offshore. So depending on the subclass that we just talked about, if your parent is offshore, it's most likely the subclass is 103 visa subclass, and that requires the visa applicant and the application to be lodged from an offshore location. And if you're here in Australia, you will be able to apply for the application whilst in Australia and lodge it here.
Okay. And what do the family members have to do? Is there anything that they need to fill out for the application process?
Family members, yes. For most of these visas which are relative-sponsored or children-sponsored visas, so they will act as the sponsor. As a requirement of the visas, for most of these relative-sponsored visas, there should be a sponsor. So they will need to fill up an application, and there are certain obligations, like they might have the obligation to look after the applicant for some time. So there are certain obligations like that.
So they might have some financial obligations?
There may be assurance of support, yes, correct.
Okay, right. And are there any age requirements in some of these visa subclasses?
It's an important question. Yes, for parent visas, specifically for an aged parent visa and visas that will be lodged in Australia, there is age requirement for the male and the female applicants. So it's a case by case depending on your date of birth and the age. For example, for a male applicant it can be 65 years, and for a female it will be from the date of your birth. So you have to specifically check those things.
What other general requirements are there besides age?
Together with Section 46 of the Act, the Regulation 2.07 and the Schedule 1 and the Schedule 2 of the requirements very broadly specify the requirements that an applicant needs to meet. For example, it's quite important at the time of lodging an application, you make sure that you at least lodge a valid application that is meeting the requirement of the Act and the regulation and at least Schedule 1. Otherwise, after some time, you find that your application is an invalid application.
So can you expand more on the valid application and what that means?
Yes, a valid application, as I indicated, is an application that will be accepted by the department. The department will accept an application if they accept that the applicant meet the requirements in the law. So if we have not applied and we do not meet certain criterias, for example, an application that must be lodged offshore at a particular location cannot be lodged here, and that will be an invalid application.
And what happens if an application is found to be invalid?
The application will be returned.
Right. And do fees apply to all these applications?
Invalid application, most of the time, fees will be returned as well.
Okay. And for anyone wanting to lodge a visa application in this area, what do you recommend they do?
As I suggested, you must go through the laws and the regulations and the relevant schedule to see you not only meet at the time of application requirements, but also your end objective is of course to get the visa whenever that will be sometime in the future. So you must nevertheless go through the full criteria of the regulations and hopefully lodge an application that would meet all the criteria, including the granting criteria of the visa.
So it's really important to understand the law. That can be quite technical. Do you think it's worth getting some legal advice?
Look, it depends case by case basis. If you are very thorough with the laws and the regulations, then you could try to lodge it yourself. In cases like this, I would always recommend as a lawyer to seek professional advice in any case, because the departmental websites or any other website information can be misleading, may not reflect the true nature of the law. So if it is an important thing, if you want to get it right, yes, get professional advice.
Thank you, Dinesh. That was very insightful.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next episode on Oz News.